In the first 5 minutes of his workday, he is already defeated. His hands are on the keyboard, but his mind is a battlefield, a storm of notifications, a looming deadline he can't focus on, a resentment from a meeting yesterday, and a low, constant hum of anxiety about a future he can't control. He is trying to build a career, a life, but he is building on sand. Every gust of wind, every wave of distraction erodes his foundation. He is reactive, fragile, perpetually off balance. He is living in the worst state a warrior or any person can find themselves in. He is living in confusion. His mind is not his own. This state has a name in the philosophy of the samurai. They called it Roshin, a leaking heart or a wavering mind. It is the mind that is scattered, pulled in 10 directions by external events and internal chatter. It is the mind that loses the battle before the first sword is drawn. The opposite of this, the state that every swordsman, archer, and monk sought to cultivate, was called Fudoshin, the immovable mind. This was not a mind of stone, rigid and brittle. That would shatter under a true blow. Fudoshin was the mind like deep, still water, a surface so calm it perfectly reflects the moon, yet with a depth and fluidity that can absorb any impact without breaking. To possess Fudoshin was to possess the ultimate weapon, an internal citadel that no external event could storm. This is the story of how one man learned to forge it. Chapter 1. The Broken Sword. Our story begins with a man named Kaido. Kaido was a skilled software architect, a problem solver by trade. Yet, in his own life, he was solving the wrong problems. He believed his anxiety came from not working hard enough, so he worked longer hours. He believed his lack of focus came from not having the right tools, so he bought new apps and planners. He believed his irritability came from other people's incompetence, so he withdrew. He was sharpening a sword that was, at its core, cracked. Every attempt to wield it with more force only risked it breaking in his hands. The ancient strategist Miyamoto Musashi wrote in his Dokudo, "Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love." On the surface, this sounds cold, but Musashi is not talking about romance. He is warning against being guided solely by reactive emotion, by lust for a quick result, by love of comfort, by the hatred of difficulty. And Kaido's entire life was being guided by these reactive feelings, the lust for relief from his anxiety, the love of the path of least resistance. His mind was a servant to his moods, and so he was a slave to the world that shaped those moods. The breaking point came not in a dramatic failure, but in a moment of profound silence. It was late. The screen glowed the only light in his apartment. He had just completed a task, and in the second before he reflexively reached for the next distraction, he felt it. A void. A hollow stillness beneath the frantic activity. He realized with chilling clarity that he had been running for years, but he had never once decided where he was going. He was a leaf in a stream, mistaking the current for direction. In the samurai's Bushido, this is the moment of kakugo, the resolve, the acceptance of death. Not a physical death, but the death of an old identity. Kaido accepted that his current mind, his reactive and scattered self, had to die. It was not serving him. It was a leaky vessel trying to cross an ocean. He had to abandon ship and learn to build a new one, from the keel up. Chapter 2. The Forge of Stillness. Kaito knew that to build an immovable mind, he first had to find immovable ground. You cannot build a castle on a shaking earthquake fault. For the samurai, and for the Zen monks who deeply influenced them, this ground was found in stillness. Not the stillness of inactivity, but the fierce, disciplined stillness of zazen, seated meditation. This was not about achieving bliss or emptying the mind. It was a far more practical, more martial exercise. It was the practice of holding a single, unwavering point of focus against the relentless army of your own thoughts. Kaido began not with an hour, but with 5 minutes each morning. He would sit, back straight, and focus on the physical sensation of his breath, entering and leaving his body. The first sessions were a revelation of his own weakness. His Roshin, his leaking mind, was exposed in full force. A thought about work would arise, and he would follow it for a full minute before remembering the breath. An itch on his nose would feel like an emergency, a memory, a plan, a regret. Each one pulled him from his post. This was the forge. The act of noticing he had wandered, and without judgment, without frustration, simply returning to the breath, was the hammer blow. Each return was folding the steel of his attention. He was not fighting the thoughts. That would be giving them power, engaging in a battle on their terms. He was doing something far more authoritative. He was letting them arise, acknowledging their presence, and consciously choosing not to follow them. He was practicing the detachment of Mushin, the no mind, where the clutter of commentary falls away and only pure awareness remains. He extended this forge into the mundane. Washing a single dish, he would feel the temperature of the water, the texture of the plate, the movement of his hand. Walking to the subway, he would feel the heel-to-toe roll of his foot, the air on his skin, the rhythm of his stride. He was practicing Ichigyo Zamai, full immersion in a single act. The modern world screams for multitasking, which is merely the fragmentation of attention, the guaranteed path to a Roshin mind. The warrior's way is the opposite, the complete unification of mind and action in this moment. In this asterisk single task. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your mind. By relentlessly training his attention on small concrete anchors, Kaido was beginning to reclaim his mind from the chaos. He was learning that stillness is not the absence of action. It is the presence of a unified will. Chapter 3. The Discipline of the Unseen. A mind forged in stillness now requires a structure to inhabit. Without structure, the mind, however calm, becomes aimless. The samurai lived by a code, Bushido, not just for battle, but for every moment of the day. How to rise, how to eat, how to speak, how to sit. This external discipline was the scaffold for the internal immovability. Kaido began to build his own modern Bushido. He started with one single, non-negotiable morning ritual. He did not add more tasks. He brought absolute intention to the ones that already existed. Making his bed became a ceremony of order. Brewing his tea became a study in patience, watching the leaves unfurl. He was applying the principle of kata, the prescribed form. In martial arts, you drill the kata 10,000 times, so that in the moment of crisis, your body moves with correct form without thought. Kaido was drilling the kata of his day, so that when the crisis of stress or distraction hit, his mind would have a default setting of disciplined action, not reactive panic. He then turned to elimination. Musashi's Dokudo begins with two powerful commands: accept everything just the way it is, and do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Kaido applied this ruthlessly to his environment and his habits. He deleted social media apps from his phone, not as a temporary detox, but as a permanent declaration that his attention was not for sale. He cleared the physical clutter from his workspace, understanding that visual noise is mental noise. He began to say no to trivial obligations that drained his time and fractured his focus. This was not about austerity for its own sake. This was the strategy of a general reducing the fronts on which he must fight. Every distraction eliminated, every trivial pleasure foregone, was one less enemy at the gates of his mind. He was creating a perimeter of silence, within which the immovable mind could hold its ground. The greatest test of this new structure came not in solitude, but in interaction. A colleague publicly criticized a project Kaido had led. The old Roshin mind flared instantly. A hot surge of anger, a flood of defensive arguments, a story of unfairness. But in the space between the stimulus and his reaction, a space he had been diligently forging for weeks, he felt a new presence. The Fudoshin. He felt the emotion rise like a wave, but he was no longer only the wave. He was also the deep ocean beneath it. He did not suppress the anger. He acknowledged it, felt its energy, and then let it pass through him without letting it dictate his words. He paused, then asked a single question. What part of the feedback can we use to improve the result? The conflict dissipated. The energy was redirected. He had not won an argument. He had won a far more important victory. He had maintained sovereignty over his own inner state. His mind had not been moved. Chapter 4. The mind as mirror. The final stage of forging an immovable mind is not about building thicker walls. It is about achieving a profound transparency. The classic Zen poem says, "The perfect man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives, but does not keep." This is the essence of the warrior's mind in action. Kaido began to practice this in his decision-making. Faced with a complex problem at work, he would first still himself. He would not rush to the first solution, which usually came from fear or pride. He would instead strive to see the situation as it truly was, Shinken, the real sword, stripping away his hopes, his fears, and his attachments to a particular outcome. He would let all the data, all the variables, all the potential paths be reflected in his calm awareness. From this placid reflection, the correct action would often emerge, not as a frantic thought, but as a clear, obvious next step. This is the application of Hajoshin, the everyday mind, in moments of pressure. It is the same mind you use to tie your shoes or drink water, applied to a crisis. There is no special state to attain, only your fundamental, disciplined mind, undistorted. Kaido found that his creativity, which he had always strained for, now arose more freely in these periods of quiet receptivity. Solutions appeared that his frantic, efforting mind had never seen. He was learning that the immovable mind is not a heavy, static thing. It is dynamic, fluid, and supremely adaptable precisely because it is not clouded by the dust of its own reactions. It reflects the world, and then moves with perfect economy. Months passed. The man who began this journey, who was defeated before his day began, was no longer there. In his place was a man of presence. He still faced deadlines, critics, and uncertainties. The world had not changed, but the mind meeting the world had been fundamentally reforged. The storms still came, but they now raged outside the citadel. Inside, there was a profound and operational calm. He understood now that the forge was not a one-time event. It was the continuous daily practice of returning to stillness, upholding discipline, and seeing clearly. The immovable mind is not a trophy you win and place on a shelf. It is a fire you must tend, a blade you must continually hone, a posture you must forever maintain. The final line of Musashi's Book of Five Rings simply states, "You must walk this path alone." This is the ultimate truth of the immovable mind. No one can grant it to you. No system can install it for you. It is forged in the silent, determined spaces of your own life, in the choices no one sees, in the disciplines you uphold for their own sake. It begins the moment you decide that your mind will no longer be a leaky vessel, subject to every wind and wave, but will become instead a deep, still, and unshakable sea. The path is there. The forge is waiting. All that is required is your resolve to enter and begin the work.